CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today, live from CGTN in London. I'm Polly Middlehurst. Our top stories this hour. Joint action. China and the United States agree to work together to tackle the climate crisis. Also today, the Czech Republic expels 18 Russian diplomats over a 2014 explosion. Moscow warns it will retaliate. Remembering the victims of the virus, Germany holds a commemoration service for the 80,000 people lost to COVID-19. And why Budapest's hospital for homeless people could itself be left without a home. So the world's biggest carbon emitters, China and the United States, say they're now going to work together to tackle the climate crisis with urgency. The agreement was reached following closed-door talks between China's top climate negotiator, Xi Jinping, and his counterpart, John Kerry. The two sides issued a joint statement following 2 days of talks in Shanghai, and they pledged to reduce emissions, staying in line with the 2015 Paris Agreement, saying stronger climate commitments should be introduced before international talks in Glasgow begin at the end of this year.
But the simple reality is no one nation does this alone. Even if the United States went to zero tomorrow, or the UK did, or Europe, the fact is that China, which is almost 30% of the world's emissions, other countries, India, Russia, Indonesia, Japan, there are a lot of industrialized countries that are contributing to this challenge. 20 nations, all of whom are invited to President Biden's summit, are responsible for about 81% of all the emissions. So to solve this problem, those 20 countries have to lead the way.
John Kerry. Well, the Chinese Vice Foreign Minister, Le Yucheng, says it'll take developed countries up to 60 years to become carbon neutral. China, though, aims to achieve that in half the time. But meeting those targets won't be easy for a country with 1.4 billion people.
Some countries are asking China to fast forward the process. That, I'm afraid, is not very realistic. When it comes to climate response, China is at a stage different from that of the United States and developed European countries. We're still a primary school student, while the US and other developed countries are already in middle school. So it is against the natural course of development if you ask these two groups of students to graduate at the same time.
Well, let's talk this through now and talk to Isabel Hilton, who's the founder of the China Dialogue, a non-profit organisation aimed at understanding China's environmental challenges. We're grateful for your time, Isabel. A pretty significant pledge, this, coming from, after all, two of the world's biggest polluters.
Definitely a significant pledge. I mean, we were all rather biting our fingers in the last 3 days to see whether it would go well or not, because when these two huge emitters, global superpowers, are at odds, then all kinds of things can go wrong. And it's no secret that there are great difficulties in the relationship right now. So the question really, when John Kerry went to Shanghai, was whether we could manage to keep climate separate from the big issues that the two countries are grappling with, because climate is an emergency and it is a matter for all humanity. And they've managed to do that, which is very good news.
So good to see China and the United States taking a lead on this. And just how significant is it that this is 7 months before people really start to get down and talk about the nitty-gritty of this in Glasgow?
Well, it's actually, you know, we've already had a year's postponement of this particular meeting because of the pandemic. This is a significant meeting because it's 5 years after Paris, in fact, 6 years after Paris. And this was the moment when everybody promised to come back and raise their ambition. So the pledges that were on the table in Paris take us to something over 3 degrees of warming. We know it's not safe to go beyond 1.5. So that's the gap. That's the gap we have to fill. And that can be filled only when the big emitters make really serious commitments to early cuts and serious cuts. Now, China has pledged 2060 carbon neutrality. That's fine. But the 2030 pledge, I think people were hoping that China would peak earlier, because the later China peaks its emissions, the higher they will be and the harder it will be after 2030 to meet that 2060 target. So it's really important that between now and December, everyone who is a big and important emitter puts on the table a serious promise to cut.
Getting away from the big emitters, if we may, for a moment, let's talk about the developing countries, the United States and China, both pledging to help those countries switch to low-carbon energy. How successful is that going to be in terms of moving away from the use of fossil fuels?
Well, it's absolutely critical. I mean, it used to be thought that any developing country had to go through a high-emitting heavy use of fossil fuel stage, as China did. China doubled its emissions in the first decade of this century because it bet everything on coal, a fuel that it has in great abundance, but which is very damaging to the climate. Now, if, for example, the countries along the Belt and Road adopted that same model, then it would be completely impossible to meet the Paris targets. So at this point, when countries are looking to develop, the choices that they make for their energy futures are absolutely critical. And so what they need is partly finance, but actually more they need technical support, because to build a renewables grid is a different proposition from building a conventional fossil fuel grid. And a lot of developing countries don't know how to do this. And that's where the assistance could be absolutely critical, and it would enable them to grow their economies, bring prosperity to their people without going down the high carbon route.
We know that US President Joe Biden will be hosting the climate summit. John Kerry talked about it earlier on. We presume then that China are serious about this and they'll attend as well. Not difficult to tell, really, isn't it, if China will go?
Well, they haven't said yet, and it's getting very close. This is Joe Biden's summit, which is on Earth Day. Of course, the UN summit is in December, and we certainly would expect China to turn up to that. There is, of course, the Bao Forum, where China might choose to make its announcements, but everybody is really looking for stronger pledges. So it's just a matter of where China chooses to make those promises, and it may choose, Xi Jinping may choose to make them in Joe Biden's summit, or he may choose to make them in a China meeting like the Bao Forum. Wherever he makes them, making them is the key thing.
Isabel Hilton, a great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, in other news today, Russia has rejected claims it was involved in a 2014 Czech Republic munitions explosion and warned it'll retaliate after Prague expelled 18 of its embassy staff. NATO and its European allies have been told about Moscow's alleged complicity, and the Czech authorities say they're now looking for 2 Russian suspects. The full story now from Guy Henderson.
Many in Britain may think they recognise these faces. These are mugshots of Ruslan Boshirov and Alexander Petrov, this time released not by UK authorities, but by the Czech Republic's.
I can say there is well-grounded suspicion about the involvement of officers of the Russian intelligence service GRU Unit 29155 in the explosion of the ammunitions depot in the Verbatitsia area in 2014.
Prague's response has been unequivocal.
As Foreign Minister of the Czech Republic, I made the decision to expel all personnel at the Russian embassy in Prague identified by our secret services as officers of Russia's secret services. Within 48 hours, 18 staff of the Russian embassy must leave the Czech Republic.
The 2014 blast killed 2 people, but at the time was treated as an accident. Now Ruslan and Petrov are accused of being part of a special unit of Russian military intelligence that blew the depot up. The Russian Foreign Ministry has called the claims unfounded and absurd. It's promising tough retaliatory measures of its own. As it did 3 years ago, when 2 identical-looking men of the same names were accused of entering Britain and trying to murder ex-Russian spy Sergei Skripal with the nerve agent Novichok in the English city of Salisbury. Russian President Vladimir Putin has always denied Moscow's involvement. The duo themselves appeared on Russian television, claiming they had visited the area but only as tourists. But the British Foreign Ministry such denials fall on deaf ears.
British Foreign Minister Dominic Raab has offered support to the Czechs, saying the latest allegations, quote, expose the lengths the Russian intelligence services are prepared to go to in their attempt to conduct dangerous and malign operations in Europe.
The allegations may not end there. Europe's intelligence services are reportedly looking into possible links between Unit 29155 and a series of other incidents too, from an attempted coup in Montenegro in 2016 to the alleged paying of bounties for the killing of NATO troops in Afghanistan. EU foreign ministers will discuss the Czech case at a meeting on Monday, in which rising tensions between Russia and Ukraine will already be occupying minds. Britain's Sunday Times newspaper reports the country is sending its warships to the Black Sea in response. French President Emmanuel Macron is now suggesting sanctions against Moscow he previously opposed, in further signs of a hardening Western stance. Guy Henderson, CGTN, London.
Well, let's get some analysis on this now and talk to Andrei Kortunov, who is Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council in Moscow. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Kortunov. Let's talk, first of all, very complex case this, but let's turn our attentions to what Russia is likely to do, in your view, to respond to those actions by the Czech Republic that we saw in Guy Henderson's report.
Well, I think that it's natural to expect some kind of reciprocity. Of course, if they expel 18 Czech diplomats from the embassy in Moscow, maybe the embassy will not be in a position to function because it's not a large embassy. So maybe they will expel fewer diplomats, but usually it's a kind of reciprocal action, no matter whether these people are engaged in any subversive activities or not.
We're just getting a little bit of breaking news from the official Russian news agency, if I can just interrupt you, Mr. Kortunov, that Russia has summoned the attaché to the embassy. So obviously things are already moving diplomatically, so to speak. But just to continue the thread of our conversation, and to pick up on that point made by Guy Henderson in his report when he said that the UK is sending warships to the Black Sea region, that, of course, against the background that we hear that military tensions around the Russia-Ukraine border are easing. What's your assessment of the situation in that region at the moment?
Well, I think that probably the situation today is slightly better than it was a couple of days ago. I think that neither side has demonstrated a clear intention to escalate. But of course, there is always a risk of what I would call an unintended escalation. An escalation might result from a minor incident, from a collision or something like that. And definitely the danger is still there.
If we can just adopt a strategic point of view for a second, what about the wider picture in terms of US relations with China and this region changing under the Biden administration?
Well, I think that Biden tries to be pragmatic as far as Russia is concerned. Definitely, he is likely to increase the U.S. support to Ukraine, and he'd like to demonstrate solidarity with other post-Soviet countries like Georgia, for example, maybe Moldova. At the same time, it is also clear that Biden will not focus on this region too much because he has so many other things to take care of, and definitely his support even to Ukraine will be limited. It might involve more arms transfers and support at the diplomatic level, but it's very unlikely that he would grant Ukraine a fast-track entry to NATO.
And what about your assessment of how Russia is behaving? Their foreign policy has been pretty consistent over the last few years. Do you see it changing in the future, and how?
Well, my take is that under the current circumstances, the Russian foreign policy is likely to be more risk-aversive rather than risk-taken, because Putin cannot score too many points at home by flexing his muscles and drumming his chest abroad. I think that the Russian public is more concerned about the burning social and economic problems at home, rather about maintaining the Russian great power status abroad.
Andrei Katunov, we appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Still to come here on CGTN's World Today. Flying with confidence. Australia and New Zealand open a travel bubble, but when will international borders be fully opened?
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
More than 100,000 people in Italy have now died from COVID-19.
The vaccination programme offers some hope for the future, but intensive care units are near capacity.
The Spanish government is hoping to vaccinate over 1 million people by next month.
Living in Germany are struggling with their mental health.
Hungary is supplementing the EU's vaccine rollout, buying doses from Russia and China to speed up the process.
4 million people have tested positive in France.
After a grim winter, the promise of a spring bloom that could mean freedom for millions.
Welcome back to CGTN London, and a reminder of our top stories. Joint action. China and the United States have agreed to work together to tackle the climate crisis. And the Czech Republic has expelled 18 Russian diplomats over a 2014 explosion. Moscow has summoned the Czech ambassador to Moscow in response. Memorial events have been held in Germany to remember the 80,000 victims of the coronavirus pandemic. It comes as the country battles a renewed surge in cases, as Rahul Patak reports.
Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel attended a memorial service in Berlin to pay her respects to those who've lost their lives during the COVID-19 crisis. Merkel, who earlier this week got her first shot of the AstraZeneca vaccine, was accompanied by the German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier. National events have been staged to remember the 80,000 people who've died in Germany, the fifth highest death toll in Europe.
We also mourn those people today who have died in both Europe and the entire world since the beginning of the global catastrophe. The mourning connects us across borders, and the shared grief strengthens our belief that we must act together in Europe and the entire world.
Meanwhile, France has now imposed a 10-day quarantine for passengers arriving from Brazil, Chile, Argentina and South Africa. The new restrictions are being gradually introduced but are expected to be fully enforced by Saturday, with travellers facing fines for breaking the rules. The country is battling against a third wave of the coronavirus pandemic and has forced the closure of non-essential shops, restricted travel and imposed a nighttime curfew. Many are now beginning to feel lockdown fatigue.
It's the length of the lockdown that is starting to take its toll. On the work front, it's okay for me, I have no worries, but it's starting to get difficult in terms of my morale.
In Italy, hundreds of workers from the entertainment industry have staged a protest in Rome. The sector employs around 300,000 people, and many have been out of work over the last year, following the closure of cinemas, theatres and music venues. The protest at Piazza del Popolo was also supported by singers and dancers. In Spain, these recently opened mass vaccination centres in Madrid may be forced to close due to a shortage of shots. In recent weeks, the Wanda Metropolitano football stadium and Muzinc concert venue had opened their doors to people needing jabs. Madrid's health chief says the region administers around 275,000 doses a week, but they're expecting a shortfall. They're due to receive just 158,000 next week. The Spanish government, which has been in open conflict with Madrid over the region's pandemic policy, says new deliveries of the AstraZeneca and Moderna vaccines should help alleviate the situation. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Well, quite a different picture in Israel, where they've lifted a mandatory requirement to wear masks outdoors and fully reopened schools. Over 80% of the population has now been fully vaccinated, and the number of infections has dropped sharply. Face coverings still, though, do have to be worn in public indoor spaces. Stay with coronavirus. India has reported a record daily increase in COVID cases as hospitals across the country face a shortage of oxygen supplies and beds. More than 261,000 new infections were reported on Sunday alone. The government's vaccination programme has been criticised for being way too slow.
Medicines are in short supply. Even oxygen is in short supply in more and more states. And those who have died are waiting for hours together for a decent cremation. What can be more dangerous and more frightening than this scenario? And the sad part is that the numbers are still rising. Therefore, coming few days may actually have even worse scenario.
That's the situation in India. Well, in Australia and New Zealand, they're about to start a travel bubble arrangement from Monday, allowing quarantine-free movement between the two nations. And whilst it's a step in the right direction for the struggling airline industry, Australia's Prime Minister says he's in no hurry to fully reopen the country's international borders. Greg Navarro reports now from Sydney.
The timing is really good at the moment. Both countries have gone several weeks without any community transmission cases across the entire countries. It's not only hugely significant in terms of this pandemic and trying to suppress the virus, it's also a big reason why this travel bubble has been re-established. Now, a bubble of sorts, you might remember, was actually put into place between Australia and New Zealand in October, but it was largely a one-way agreement, meaning people from New Zealand were allowed to travel to Australia quarantine-free. The reverse was not true. Australians had to spent a couple of weeks in hotel quarantine once they arrived. Eventually, it was suspended after small outbreaks in both countries occurred and sort of upended things. All right, now, as far as some of the arrangements in place needed now, that people have to, in order to take part in this, they have to have been in either country, Australia or New Zealand, for at least 14 days, have not returned a positive COVID test, meaning all the tests, if they've had any, have had to come back negative, and they have to remain symptom-free. Now, people have been warned that there is no guarantee in this quarantine-free travel, that things could change in a heartbeat, meaning that if outbreaks do occur, flights could very well be canceled, or people could be forced into hotel quarantine once they arrive in a particular destination. And we're told that travel insurance in this case, well, that's not something you should bet on, because in a lot of cases, travel insurance will not cover those added costs. Regardless of the risks involved, as you can imagine, the tourism industries, the very hard-hit tourism industries of both countries, are pretty darn excited about all this. They've had a very tough 12-plus months, and they are looking to get some sort of boost out of this bubble.
Greg Navarro reporting there from Sydney in Australia. Let's take a look then at some other news from around the world in brief. And doctors have warned jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny will die in the next few days if he's not given urgent medical care. He's been on hunger strike since March the 31st, demanding proper treatment for acute back and leg pain. The anti-corruption campaigner nearly died in August 2020 when he was poisoned with the chemical nerve agent Novichok. He accuses the Russian President Vladimir Putin of trying to assassinate him, which the Kremlin denies. Around 100 people have been injured in a train derailment north of the Egyptian capital, Cairo. Early reports by local media suggesting that the number of people who have died are unconfirmed at the moment, but there have been fatalities. Last month, at least 20 people were killed and nearly 200 injured when two trains collided near Tafta. That's about 400 kilometres south of Cairo. And Spanish police have revealed they have raided an illegal 3D printed gun factory in Tenerife in the Canary Islands last September. Officers seized an arsenal of weapons, including a replica assault rifle, small arms, several gun barrels, 2 tasers and a machete. The owner of the factory has been arrested and charged with illegal possession of weapons and explosives. White supremacist literature was also seized in the raid. Now, homelessness in Hungary's capital is expected to rise in the next few years because of job losses during the pandemic. Now, Budapest is at risk of losing its only homeless hospital because of a dispute over the building it's housed in. Penelope Leash has this report.
These are some of the hundreds of people sheltering in Budapest's only homeless hospital, given medical care as well as somewhere to stay.
The conditions are very bad, not here but out there because of the virus. There is no possibility to move into a home or another hospital. We're not taken elsewhere due to the epidemic.
The site is unique, caring for people with chronic illnesses and those who've been discharged but have nowhere else to go.
I've been here for 2 years. There is very good medical care here. The nurses are also very good.
But after nearly a decade, the hospital building has become the centre of a battle between the mayor's office and the Hungarian federal government, who want to take back the space.
The mayor is enthusiastically fighting the government, but we do not want to fight for a homeless hospital, and we do not want unnecessary political debates. The government will start negotiations with
We have another property where we could provide healthcare. There are very serious minimum conditions for hospital care. If we have to finish the work there, we cannot move to any of our other properties. It is 100%. This building was built specifically for medical purposes and has the technical equipment of the wards, elevators and so forth.
The hospital has been given an extension to keep using the building until the end of June, but Budapest's mayor wants more, demanding the government allow the hospital to remain where it is to avoid disrupting services. Those who've called the hospital home for months, even years, are hopeful a solution will be found in time.
There is a great need for this institution because here we get everything we need for our illness. I really want to stay here.
Experts warn demand for homeless services will grow in the years following the pandemic as more people find themselves out of work in the capital. Penelope Leash, CGTN, Budapest.
Well, a reminder of our top stories now on CGTN London. China and the United States have agreed to work together to tackle the climate crisis, pledging to reduce emissions with urgency. And Russia has summoned the Czech ambassador after Prague expelled 18 Russian diplomats over a 2014 munitions explosion. And that's just about it for The World Today. Thanks very much for watching. We are, of course, available on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion as well as, of course, at the CGTN app and CGTN.com. Meanwhile, from all the team here in London, thanks very much for watching.